We're so pleased that you're here with us tonight, especially for coming out to the parks on a rainy day. We're really happy that you're here, and we can't wait to share this exciting program. I want to welcome everybody on behalf of Metroparks and Dana Incorporated. As I said, we're pleased to have you here for the very first in the series, Sustaining Our World. It's a special speaker series that is launching for the first time this spring. You're here today in the first phase of the Glass City Metropark, which opened in 2020. Phase 2 of the Glass City Metropark, which extends just past the Great Lakes Museum, is currently under construction. When Phase 2 is completed next year, it will be just the start of a much grander plan to transform our entire riverfront. The Glass City Riverwalk will include 300 acres of parkland, connecting this park with Middle Grounds Metropark and everything in between along a 5-mile trail. It's a transformational project that will bring a host of social, economic, and environmental benefits to our community. I invite you all to stay after and explore the boards and talk with staff to learn more about the project after the session. The Glass City Metropark and Riverwalk is being made possible by a community of public, private, and philanthropic partners, including Dana Incorporated. Slide. We are really grateful to have Dana as one of our lead philanthropic donors for the Glass City project. Their gift will help support the construction and maintenance of the Riverwalk, as well as making an ongoing commitment to public engagement in sustainability through this lecture series and volunteer cleanup days along the Maumee River. Each year, the Sustaining Our World lecture series will include 4 speakers on topics related to the significance of Northwest Ohio's natural resources, the importance of protecting and restoring our ecosystems, and the ways that our community, all of you, can make a difference, a positive difference for our environment. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Jeff Cole, the Senior Director of Corporate Communications at Dana Incorporated.
Thanks, Sally, and thank all of you for being here tonight. Welcome to the inaugural lecture. I'm proud to present about 1,500 Dana employees in the greater Toledo area as we kick off tonight's event and this speaker series at the Glass City Metropark. We at Dana are extremely proud to partner with the Metroparks and the Metroparks Foundation on this project. When Dave Zank and Allie approached us about supporting the Glass City Metropark and Riverwalk, it was a no-brainer. This is a project we wanted to get behind for all of the reasons that Allie spoke about, and you've heard them before. Just tremendous benefits for the city, for the neighborhoods, for all of us. There's another reason you might not have thought about, and that is that Dana and the Maumee River are inexorably linked. If you think about it, our world headquarters is in the city of Maumee, about 1 mile north of the Maumee River in the Maumee River watershed. Not just our headquarters, but our entire campus, which includes a Sustainable Mobility Center, an Advanced Manufacturing Center, an IT, Global IT Center, all right there in Maumee, about a mile north. But our oldest, one of our oldest and largest operations is in Fort Wayne, where the Maumee River begins. You also may not know that we're opening our newest assembly operation in Napoleon, Ohio, about 1 mile south of the Maumee River. And our Toledo Assembly Plant on Jeep Parkway is situated along the Ottawa River, which is the final tributary into the Maumee. So our company has a special relationship with the Maumee River, and we wanted to celebrate that. But we wanted to do more than just write a check, and we wanted to make sure that we had a programmatic element to the Glass City Metropark and Riverwalk, and thus this speaker series was born, and actually Allie's brainchild, so she gets a lot of the credit for that. So. But some of you might wonder why Dana, this 118-year-old metal-bending manufacturer of mechanical products, would be so bullish on sustainability. And the bottom line is we're probably not the Dana that your parents and grandparents and even some of you would have known. Sustainability and our guiding vision toward a zero-emissions future is at the heart of everything we do. We have completely repositioned our company to focus on sustainability as we support our customers' clean energy priorities with advanced e-propulsion systems across all mobility markets, so everything from light vehicle, even golf carts and gardening equipment and stuff like that, through passenger cars, heavy trucks, underground mining equipment, agriculture, construction, all of that. anywhere in the world. And in fact, more than half of our new business sales, it projected out as far as we've booked business, come from electrified powertrains. So it's pretty exciting, and that transformation has just happened within the last decade. But more than that, we also have an opportunity to lead in sustainability by changing how we manufacture our products to reduce our impact on the environment. Last year, Dana announced that we're reducing our global annual greenhouse gas emissions by more than 50% by 2030. And we'll do that through lowering energy consumption and driving efficiency improvements. We've entered into a renewable energy purchase agreement that will reduce our U.S. electricity GHG emissions by 90%, and sourcing renewable energy from on-site solar arrays. In fact, you'll see solar arrays in front of our Toledo driveline operations along I-75. Helping to deliver this change at Dana, I've got a colleague with me tonight I'd like to introduce. That's Greg Morris, Head of Global Sustainability for Dana. He and his colleague, Stephanie Roy, our sustainability specialists, are just doing amazing work. In fact, you'll see them. Allie mentioned the Maumee River cleanup days. They'll be out here Monday morning with a crew of Dana volunteers cleaning up the Maumee River. So thanks, Greg, for being here. So in closing, welcome. We're excited to be a part of this. Looking forward to tonight and for the future Sustaining Our World lectures. I guess the next one is June 22nd, but before we jump ahead to that, we've got a great program tonight. So thanks, Allie.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Dana. The support you're providing is a tremendous endorsement of the importance of this project, and we can't tell you how much we appreciate it. Thank you. And now I'm pleased to turn you all over to the program host. It's my pleasure to introduce Scott Carpenter, the Director of Public Relations for Metroparks Toledo.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Tonight we will hear from experts they discuss the conversion of former brownfields into clean, safe, natural parkland, right here on a site where just such a transformation is already happening. The presentation will focus on the economic benefits of restoring sites like Glass City, the adaptive reuse of dredged material from the Maumee River, and plans for the future of Toledo's riverfront. Following the presentation, the speakers will come together for a panel discussion with the audience, and questions will be encouraged. It says press now. To start our discussion, I'd like to welcome tonight's first speaker. He is the Brownfield Redevelopment Officer for the City of Toledo. Please welcome Marc Gerdeman.
Thanks, Scott. I want to thank Dana and the Metroparks again for having us. Today, we're going to talk about, or I'll be talking about the history of kind of this property going back all the way to the 1913, and the kind of the transformation and cleanup that's taken place in the last 20 years. It's kind of hard to put 20 years of presentations in 10 minutes, but we'll see what we can do. So just a little bit about myself. I've been with the City of Toledo for 17 years. I started out in stormwater compliance and emergency response. So back in 2005, one of my first emergency response spills actually occurred over here. It was where the former sports arena was. There was an oil spill that took place, and that was one of my first ER visits out here. So I have a lot of history and a lot of memories going on this site. And then in 2012, I transitioned from stormwater compliance into brownfield program. So it's been a great decision to do that. A little bit about my program. So I'm a man of one in the brownfield program. However, I work with the economic development or real estate department, our law department, and plenty of nonprofit project partners like the Metroparks, Land Bank, Port Authority, Connect Toledo, to get things done. So my goal and my mission is to redevelop land for highest and best use. We've had some amazing success over the past 20 years, basically receiving grants. We've received 23 US EPA grants, totaling $8.9 million and over $20 million in various state and other private funding resources. Our current US EPA revolving loan program, basically, I'm the environmental cleanup bank. Nonprofits can come to me for cleanup projects, and I can subgrant money to them for their cleanup, or if developers have projects that need cleaned up, we can basically beat the bank on interest rates and loan them money for environmental cleanup, which is really, really cool. And next week, we are hoping to hear back from US EPA. We applied for a US EPA Brownfield assessment grant for $500,000, and funds for that can be used to conduct phase 1 and phase 2 environmental assessments on properties that need it. We've done almost, if you look across the river, during the last US EPA grant round, we've probably assessed 5 or 6 properties during that time. Some of our state cleanup money we'll talk about later in the program, but the majority of our cleanup programs have come from the Clean Ohio Fund projects. Okay. All right, so what the heck is a brownfield? So it's a real property which may be comprised of or presented with potential hazardous substance or a contaminant. This could be a wide variety of media. You know, we're talking a small little corner store that could have been a dry cleaner back in the day, gas station with underground storage tanks. Even a golf course can be deemed a brownfield based on what kind of pesticides, herbicides they put on their property and things like that. And believe it or not, even Great Lakes freighters can be, you know, assumed a brownfield, which we'll discuss later too. So why are brownfields important? These 4 reasons are very important for the city. A lot of them that sit vacant have a negative impact on the community. A lot of them are located in distressed, low-income inner-city communities, predominantly dominated by minorities. Most of these factories are huge nuisances. If you look at the Detroit Avenue rail corridor, you can see all the industries that have left Toledo, and they've left, and their footprint is still there. Former Champion, Sparkplug, Doler, Jarvis, you know, you see all those littered up there. We are working on assessing those and trying to come up with reuse ideas to get these back into productive use. They're serving no purpose the way they are sitting right now. They're always open for, you know, open dumping and things like that. So we're trying to tackle these as best we can with the assessment grants and other state and federal funding to get these cleaned up. Brownfields also, you know, decrease community reinvestment and home ownership, resulting in the decay of housing stock and higher unemployment. So what we're here for to talk about today is the Acme Power Plant and associated property south of this. So back in 1918, the Toledo Edison plant was opened. It was a 78 megawatt coal-fired power plant. This was built before Ohio EPA existed, so there was no really any pollution control laws or anything like that taking place. And you can see, you know, the Maumee River was highly industrialized back in the day, and you know, there's lots going on with that. So it closed in 1993, and the question was, what are we going to do with this property? Here's another shot of kind of, you know, you can see the Marina District, or the Acme Power Plant. You had the fly ash pond south of there. You had a construction laydown area, a marina and sports arena that was there. A little timeline. So the city started getting into agreements with Toledo Edison to transfer the Acme property back in the late 90s, and with some money included with that. Environmental assessments were done in 98, 99, and in 2000, July 2000, we found quite a bit of issues. The phase 1, this is just for the Acme Power Plant, which sits on 3.8 acres. You know, they found 49 areas of concern. So basically, when you look at environmental, what happens in a phase 1 assessment is a consultant looks at the overall site history. They can look at maps, things like that. They do on-site inspections and note basically what is potentially wrong with the property. And they found the AST is an above-ground storage tank. They found underground storage tanks. There's coke oven gas lines, transformers, caustic waste, PCBs from the switch yards, and then RECRA's, the hazardous waste that was been stored on the site, and on and on and on. Phase 2 basically looks at sampling the media, like sampling groundwater and soil. And there were 18 areas just in the Acme area that were above, that exceeded commercial industrial standards. So I kind of combined this slide. This kind of shows, represents the Acme power plant. You can see here, you've got the marina and then the arena. When we went after the Clean Ohio Fund, we had to split up the properties because they had each unique properties and issues for cleanup. So if you can kind of see in red, from the sports arena, kind of the fly ash pond is kind of deemed the arena, and then from the arena all the way to the marina is the marina, and then you have the Acme power plant segmented out all by itself. So we, with knowing kind of the environmental hazards and roadblocks, there was a lot of, we have 100 acres of riverfront property. There's lots of developers interested in the property, but no one knew how to, find the money for this cleanup. This was a rendering from 2001, and it shows, over here is you can see the sports arena. That was an idea of moving the sports arena up a little ways and coming up with other developments along the way. But once again, the biggest thing was, we know that there's contamination. How much is this going to cost to clean up? And then how are we going to get this cleaned up? So right around that time, the Ohio Department of Development came up with the Clean Ohio Fund program. And that, basically is a program to work on cleanup properties. That funding was also eligible for demolition, other site assessments for doing more groundwater monitoring, more soil, looking at more soil sampling. And in 2002, the Port Authority, who at the time owned that small portion, or not a small portion, but the portion over by the Arena District in the city of Toledo, applied for the two areas of the marina and the arena, and we were awarded that back in 2002. Shortly after, we went after the Marina District, after all, we kind of assessed what we needed to do for the cleanup on that one. And one of the grant requirements for the Clean Ohio Fund program is to enter into what they call the Ohio EPA's Voluntary Action Program. And that's basically the volunteer, which is basically a landowner, works with Ohio EPA and basically takes the property, gets it cleaned up, does more assessments on the property, and submits what's called a no further action. And that basically is something that Ohio EPA and their technicians and lawyers look at to make sure the cleanup is perfect before they release what's called an environmental covenant. All right, so here's a couple pictures these are back from 2006 of when we started with the marina portion. We started removing some of the above ground storage tanks. You can see the dirty dirt that's even just around this area. These roll-off boxes were lined, so based on the contamination, they were put in there and then sent to licensed landfills that could accept this waste. Asbestos abatement was probably the biggest cleanup factor for the the Acme property. They had huge boilers in those rooms, and 3 or 4 stories tall, extremely expensive to clean up. What you have to do, the one slide on the left shows that when you do this cleanup, these rooms have zero oxygen space because this asbestos is friable. It can pulverize and fly in the air, and it's very dangerous. So when you do a cleanup and in something this big, it takes a lot of containment, takes a lot of specialty workers. You have to be registered or accredited by the state of Ohio to do this cleanup, and it's just a huge amount of work to get that going. And you can also see some of the mercury switches here, which had to be removed and properly disposed of as well. Here's another couple slides of the thermal system insulation throughout there. The white represents the asbestos and just how much, this place was loaded with this stuff. And then you can see another picture of the workers in their proper PPE getting that stuff cleaned up. A lot of our projects between arena and the marina, we had to haul off thousands of cubic yards of contaminated soil. So once that was hauled off, we had to bring in material to cover up that. So here's just kind of a boring picture of that. But it's important that when that material's hauled off, we have to bring in material, the clean material, so you actually plant something on it and make it worthwhile. Here's another picture of the Acme property and kind of the getting ready for new development out there. So you can see the above ground storage tanks have been removed. A retaining wall was installed. And then finally, we had to, dredge this area because obviously this is where the marina is now, and that material had to be hauled off as well. Remember when I discussed that a Great Lakes freighter could be a brownfield? Well, when they decided to bring the Boyer, which is docked at International Park, over here, that inside boiler room was loaded again with asbestos. So we were fortunate enough to go after another cleanup grant, and we were awarded $200,000 to clean up all of the boiler room insulation, everything inside the Boyer. And that was around, I think, 2012. Here's kind of another pictures of just kind of the interior of the thermal insulation, the boilers and whatnot. And then finally, this is how many bags of asbestos that came out of just the Boyer itself. I mean, it is unbelievable. And then once again, this has to be all hauled off to a landfill that accepts asbestos. So, after, the cleanup took place, everything was documented. The city and the Port Authority submitted no further actions to Ohio EPA, and we were all Ohio EPA issued the covenants not to sue back in 2008, 2010, and 2011. And like I said, when the city, we received these covenants, the director of Ohio EPA basically issues this to protect the property and future owners from being responsible for future investigation and cleanup, which is a big deal. So, these sites were cleaned up to a commercial and industrial standard, and eventually, years later, we had to change it when the Metroparks took it over because that changed the land use, but that was still, put in the environmental covenant for that. So great, we got a clean bill of health. We can start working on what to do with demolition of the Acme. That began in 2012. Couple pictures of kind of the new marina as that was being taken place, the passenger terminal. The Boyer was cleaned up. That was moved over, changed, and dedicated to the Schoonmaker. And then finally, this is kind of when I started with the city. So the Acme building was basically the exterior and most of the internal stuff was demolished. We received a grant from HUD to try to preserve as much as we could from this place because it was a really pretty building. We were hoping to keep some of the smokestacks, but after a structural survey done in 2013, the stress cracks and the bands that wrap around those brick structures were just too far gone. So we decided to implode the two smaller stacks and then potentially go after and try to renovate or do something different to the larger one. But when we did the assessment on that one, it came back it was like $700,000 to get that one back to its current state. Plus, we found out that we didn't have the correct, FAA lights, the lighting on there for aviation, so that had to be retrofitted as well. So it just wasn't in our game for that. So I think this might work, but this will show just a video. You can see the former Mayor Collins is down there pulling it up to implode the two smaller stacks. So our intent was for the larger ones, since we knew it still had to come down, we wanted to retain some of it. We were working with the museum to potentially retrofit it into some type of lighthouse or some type of nice keeping thing, but we had an issue with the demo contractor. I think he put too much TNT in it to where it didn't get to the level we wanted to. So unfortunately, we took the rest of it out because it just did not look right in any state. So. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So after that, there were couple entities that acquired this whole 100-acre property. But I'm happy to say that the Metroparks took this on, and they're now one of the biggest brownfield redevelopment organizations in this area. So claps, hands up to them. Thank you. So that is me. Okay, thank you.
Our next speaker joins us from the Toledo-Lucas County Port Authority, where he serves as Vice President of Business Development. He knows how to make an entrance by arranging to have a freighter coming through just as he's speaking. Please welcome Joe Cappell.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks to Dana as well for arranging this. And I love my job at the Port Authority because yesterday I was an extra in the Tom Hanks movie. They were filming at the train station, and my wife met him and talked to him for like 10 minutes, so that was pretty cool. But today I'm here to talk about dirt, and you are sitting here and wanting to hear about dirt, and that dirt is called dredged material. So I'm excited to be here. And I tell people that it is just dirt, and instead of looking at it as a waste, why not try to look at it as a resource? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how they're doing that here and what some of the other initiatives are to beneficially use dredged material in the community. So, but I want to go back to Marc's presentation and just say, this project and other projects in Toledo are great examples of how the agencies around here work together to get things done. So we got a lot to be proud of when we look back at the progress that has been made over the last 10 years or so. So, dredged material itself kind of has a bad reputation. Sometimes it's referred to as sludge, sometimes toxic sludge, but really, those things are incorrect. It's pretty much just dirt. It's pretty clean, the material that at least comes from the Maumee River here, and it consists of really fine silt and clay. So it's the kind of material that, when it's wet and you step in it, you would sink into it and it would like suck the shoe off your foot. That's the kind of material that we're talking about here. Most of it comes from farm fields through the process of erosion. And sometimes the dredged material is higher in nutrient content, things like phosphorus, than the native soils. But there could be an advantage to that, and I'll tell you a little bit about that as well. So we've been busy researching different ways that dredged material can be used. But first, we should probably ask the question, why do we need to dredge in the first place? And the answer to that is because the Port of Toledo really drives the economy of the region. Now, these are some statistics, and I know it may be hard to see, but they came off of an economic impact study we did in 2017. And it shows that over 7,000 jobs are supported by the Port of Toledo. And $1 billion in economic impact is generated every year. And all of this was calculated before Cleveland Cliffs built their new direct reduction plant on another former brownfield site called the Ironville Marine Terminal. So that is a $1 billion project, and I'm sure these numbers are much higher today than they were back then. I think we're lucky here along the Maumee River that we really have space to accommodate all uses of our waterfront, from commercial uses to industrial uses, recreational uses, and for environmental projects as well. Not every city is that lucky. If you go to Cleveland or Detroit, you've got the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame next to the port, next to condominiums, next to, you name it. The Brown Stadium is right down there, and everybody's jam-packed down there. But luckily for us, we have the lake, we have the bay, and we have miles of river with parks and all kinds of development for everyone. So that's lucky that those things are not in competition with one another. The unfortunate thing is that in order to keep our river safe for commercial navigation, we have to dredge quite a bit of material. Every year, between 400,000 and 1 million cubic yards of material are dredged from the western basin of Lake Erie and along the Maumee River. That's the equivalent of about 27,000 dump trucks of dredged material. So if you can imagine that, that's certainly a huge quantity to have to deal with. And so where do you put all that material? Here you see on this slide the federal channel. Not sure if this laser works or not, but it's represented by the green line here. And you can see this is Lake Mile 19. So we have 19 miles of federal of lake to dredge, And then this says River Mile 7. That's 7 miles of the Maumee River that need to be dredged to get here to I-75, where you see the Andersons and the ADM, the great mural on the ADM terminal. So when this channel was originally constructed, what they did is they just sidecast this material, and they created some small confined disposal facilities along the banks of the river. And our general cargo dock, which is kind of right at the mouth of the river in this area, was actually constructed on one of these areas that was made out of dredge material. Now there are really 2 areas that are still identifiable as confined disposal facilities. They're shown on the map. Here you have Island 18, which is the smaller island here. It's mainly controlled by the Army Corps of Engineers. And the larger island that we refer to as Facility 3, most of that facility is controlled by the Port Authority, with a small portion controlled by the Army Corps of Engineers as well. That's about a 550-acre facility. So most of the material that was dredged from our channel began filling up those areas in the decades leading up to the 1990s. And then around the 1990s, late 90s, the Army Corps of Engineers began putting the dredge material out into the open waters of Lake Erie. And it started as a gradual kind of transition, and eventually 600,000 to 1 million cubic yards were being dredged, and then it's just brought out to this area of, uh-oh, what'd I do? I think I hit the escape button. If somebody can help me bring that back. Instead of the laser, I hit the escape button. But anyway, there's an area out here that says lake placement area. It's out by the Toledo Lighthouse. And that is where the Army Corps was dumping the material. So the Ohio EPA always kind of took issue with that. You can see it. It says open lake discharge site on this map. And eventually, after Toledo's water crisis, in an effort to kind of reduce the resuspension of phosphorus and other materials in that dredge material, Ohio made a law that said, hey, after 2020, Army Corps of Engineers, no more open lake disposal with dredge material. So that could put the Port Authority in kind of a strange position, because we need to dredge to keep the port open. We want to do the best thing for the environment. You know, what do we do? Fortunately, we've been working with the state of Ohio and the Corps all along, and kind of thinking ahead on what we could do. And we came up with a plan that we released in 2012 called the Toledo Harbor Sediment Management and Use Plan. And the plan itself was funded through Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding, and it identified several ways to reuse our dredge material. One of those ways was to blend it with other materials to make stuff that's usable, and that's called engineered soil. Another idea was to use it to create wetlands that could filter out nutrients that were coming down the river and out into the lake. And then finally, there was an idea, and probably the most viable idea would be to return it to the ag fields that it came off of in the first place. So, you know, the challenge, of course, was the scale. And we thought, well, you know, let's start small. We need some pilot projects to really demonstrate how these options can work on a small scale, and then we can do them on a larger scale moving forward. So over on Summit Street by Jamie Farr Park, we picked an area that we called the Dredge Center of Innovation. It was owned by the city of Toledo. And at that site, we began placing some of the dredge material. It's right next to where the city of Toledo stores their leaf compost. So we thought, well, what if we mix dredge material with leaf compost and come up with a product that we could use, you know, and maybe even sell at one point. But additionally, we did some agricultural field projects out there, and we planted some corn out there. So you see the corn growing in the dredge material. And this was done a few years back, and the corn did really well. So, you know, what if a farmer didn't have to add commercial fertilizer? What if they could add dredge material instead? Part of the challenge is the pricing and logistics of that, but, you know, that's something that we could work on and build off of. So anyway, about $2.5 million to construct the facility that you see here came out of the state's capital budget through the Healthy Lake Erie program. And each of the cells that you see pictured here may be a little hard to see, but they have under drains and dewatering systems where we could actually also do some experimentation with edge of field technology, where you would drain a farm field into another cell, and then before the water returns to the river, do some additional treatment to the water there. So in 2016, we pumped about 40,000 cubic yards into this site. That was about 27 barge loads in 21 days of time. And then the next year in 2017, we put about 35,000 more cubic yards of material into these sites. The material was pumped in, so a lot of water and dredge material going in to these cells at the rate of 9,000 gallons per minute. And in these slides, you can see the barge out here in the channel, and then there's a line that comes this way, and we're actually filling the cells from the backside, and the material is kind of flowing back towards the river. So, kind of moving on. So now we have our Center of Innovation, and we've got some experiments going. What are we going to do from here? Well, in 2018, we created a group called the Drift Committee, and Ohio EPA was a big part of that initiative. And that was, actually getting farmers together and giving us advice about what experiments we could do at this location. And one of the primary missions of this committee was advising on the use of the Center of Innovation and coordinating the research there. So in late 2018, we partnered up and did two grants through the Ohio Lake Erie Commission and began working with Wright State and Bowling Green to measure the benefits that dredge material would have in crop production. And basically, the research determined that some of this stuff some of our crops that are commonly grown in this area grow better in dredge material than in native soils. So the next step, of course, was to take material from the Dredge Center of Innovation to the farm fields and blend that in. And that work is actually currently underway down in Wood County at a test site down there. They actually spread the dredge material with a manure spreader, and it worked a lot better than expected down there. So we continue to, think of innovative ways that we can use the material. And one of the most innovative things that we've done with it is what's happening right here, right across the river from where it's stored. And I think Tim might touch on that a little bit in his presentation, how dredge material is being used right here in a public park. And I think that's a great example of, the change in mindset from sludge to resource. And that's important for sustainability moving forward. So all of these things can continue to work together. So, kind of fast forwarding through my notes here a little bit. I think this is the last slide that I have. And what this slide shows is the big Facility 3 right at the mouth of the river. And what's important here is that after the state passed the legislation in 2020 that there would be no more open lake placement, we began making some improvements to this facility so that we could reactivate it and once again pump the material into this facility. So we've rebuilt some of these berms that go around these different cells in the facility. And the inland lake that you see here is the result of 2 years worth of material being pumped into these cells. The idea here is to dewater these cells and continue to fill it up. When this cell is full, begin filling up the next cell. And then as this dewaters, excavate material out, reuse it, and make more capacity available. The area in the back here is the area once controlled by Toledo Edison, and that has been turned over to the Port Authority, and we'll probably put some cells for dredge material storage back here as well. So the best news of all is that we just found out from the state of Ohio that $9 million will be available to make additional improvements to this facility that will give us more than 20 years worth of disposal space in this facility. So no more open lake disposal for the next 20 years. that is a major accomplishment when you consider 1 million cubic yards to contend with each year. So we're not going to give up on our beneficial use projects, but at least for the foreseeable future, we're in pretty good shape here at the Port of Toledo so that we can continue to have navigation, but also continue to pursue some of these beneficial uses that I've told you about today. So thanks very much. That's all I have, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Joe. Our final speaker tonight is representing Metroparks Toledo, where he is Chief Natural Resources Officer. My colleague, Tim Schetter. Please welcome.
Thank you, Scott. Well, as Allie touched on at the beginning of the night, this is a transformative project for downtown Toledo and for Northwest Ohio. And there's going to be a lot of exciting things happening on this site. There's an ice skating ribbon that's being built. There's a market hall and a restaurant. There's all these really cool adventure play and water play features that are all designed to connect people back to the river and to connect people with nature. But at its core, this will still be a Metropark. And what that means is at least 80% of this is going to be restored and maintained as a natural area. And so I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so kind of walking through the steps of the why and the how behind that restoration and how it is that we're going to bring nature back to this site. And if I get through this without messing it up, I'll consider this a success. So just to start with, I'm going to be focusing specifically on Glass City as part of this presentation, but this really highlights our overall restoration objectives. So the same approach that we're using here, and this is the kind of the why behind it, is the same approach that we've used for other restoration projects like Howard Marsh, the expansion of Secor. Those are all pretty much follow the same formula. And we really have kind of two overarching sets of objectives when we approach a restoration project. And the first set of objectives are ecological in nature. And obviously, first and foremost that comes to mind is habitat. And I'll be talking more about that in just a few minutes. But the other important benefit to really highlight here is the water quality emphasis. We live in a region that has lost over 90% of its historic wetlands. And when you look at the water quality crisis that we've dealt with in the Maumee River and with the lake itself, that is largely driven by this historic loss of wetlands. So any opportunity we have to restore natural areas adjacent to rivers or streams or in areas that used to be wetlands, that is a lot of bang for the buck. So that is always a focus. Anytime we can accomplish water quality as part of a project, we absolutely do that. The other important set of objectives to really talk about and emphasize, and I think Glass City is a great example of this, are the social objectives. And the first of these here, I would generally refer to as environmental justice. So within the urban center of Toledo, the population that lives in close proximity to this site has historically been underserved by lack of access to parkland, lack of access to nature. And that's just not important from a recreational perspective. Think of all of the other benefits that come along with being in close proximity to restored natural areas. Clean air, clean water, reduced noise, reduced heat from the heat island effect of all the blacktop, as well as stabilizing property values. All of those I would put into that bucket of environmental justice. The other important thing, and this is to me one of the most rewarding aspects of any project, is the community engagement. This is one of the best ways we have of connecting people back to the Metroparks conservation mission. A couple weekends ago, we had students from Waite High School and ANSAT. This was on their spring break. They came out to help us plant 500 trees at a site not far from Glass City. And you can just see how engaged the kids are and how excited they are with doing this. So restoration is one of the best ways we can connect people and really get them excited about nature. It's not just about what's happening here, but if we can get people connected to the larger conservation issues that we're dealing with globally, this is a really good opportunity to do that. So with that, I'm going to jump more directly into Glass City. And one thing, I'm in addition to a nature geek, I'm a little bit of a history buff, so bear with me with some of these slides. But the reason I'm showing these for you is site history is one of the most informative things we look at when we're looking at restoring a site. And so, keep in mind that the ecological processes that shaped a site historically, things like hydrology, soil formation, those are going to be the same things that are going to drive the success of a restoration project today. So I'm bringing this first slide up, and I'll just go through a series of slides real quick so you can kind of get a vision of what this site used to look like and hopefully help illustrate kind of the direction we want to take it. So looking at 1832, this is 5 years before Toledo became a city. Think of what the context of the landscape was around here at this time. You have the cities of Perrysburg and Maumee that are forming, but by and large, this is the Great Black Swamp. And I'm not going to try to mess this up by pushing the button, but you can see in the top right of the image, you won't be able to see the text, but it says impassable marsh. And the image on your left, that's probably the best portrayal of what this site might have looked like 200 years ago. This is a picture from the Florida Everglades, but visually just think of what this would have looked like. This would have been riverine wetlands, these massive stretches of wetlands on either side of the Maumee River stretching out into Maumee Bay. So this would have been just a spectacular place to be back then. And then advancing forward here to this image is approximately 1876. So here the city of Toledo is now 20 years old. The industrial age is upon us, and the site is transforming. And this is really important context because the site, where it says there, site of Glass City Metropark, that is literally where we're at today. In 1876, it simply didn't exist. We would be sitting in the Maumee River. So look at where Front Street is. Front Street is all the way out by where you see Waite High School. That was all Maumee River. And back at this time, this would have been, the river would have been more than twice as wide as it is today. You would have already seen the transformative effects of the industrial age. By this point in time, the Black Swamp has largely been cleared, and so the water clarity would have absolutely changed. We would have lost those riverine wetlands by this point, so no more emergent marshes, but the city was known as Frogtown for a reason. Those wetlands would have extended well throughout the city, and the sounds of frogs calling would have been deafening. But again, you can see how the river itself is transforming. And here you can see, this is 1935 image. You can see, literally, the Glass City Metropark, the site is being built right now. There's a railroad bridge that connected the river for many years after this, and you can see the land now extends on the other side of Front Street. Now advancing forward into the 1940s, getting into some of the images that Marc showed with the Acme power plant. And here, pretty much, we're getting close to the footprint of where we sit today. And then the final image here, and I put the arrow as close as I can get on this image to where we're sitting right now. This is largely the footprint that we have to deal with. And you can see that there's a lot going on in this image, with the power plant, with the fly ash pits immediately downstream from here. So what Marc has been able to demonstrate is, we've inherited a clean site, but we're still dealing with the legacy of all of these past uses. First and foremost being, it wasn't land to begin with. So all of that material that was brought on site, we have to contend with that. So how do we go about restoring this site? And first and foremost, you have to look at soil. And differing with Joe a little bit, it's not just dirt. But dirt is an important part of it. So, soil is full of living organisms. The soil ecosystem is extremely diverse. And a healthy soil is, rule of thumb, if you pick up a handful of healthy soil, there's more microorganisms in that handful of soil than there are people on Earth. These are, billions of organisms, microbes, bacteria, fungus, soil nematodes. It is a really complex ecosystem. And again, the types of plant communities that we want to try to restore are all connected to this. So, for example, many of our plant species have a symbiotic relationship with fungus in the soil. They call them, mycorrhizal fungi. Also, there's many species that require arthropods or other invertebrates in order to persist. So there's wildflower species like violets, wild ginger, trilliums that actually require ants to tend the plants and to disperse the seeds. So I say all this as background in that none of this currently exists on site. And one of our first priorities here as we look at restoring the park in the future is, how do we build these soils? This is a process that is going to literally take decades, but we need a good fundamental start. So one of the most important things, and this is where the partnership with the Toledo-Lucas County Port Authority and the Ohio EPA has come into play, is, we will be bringing up to 30,000 cubic yards of dredged material on site to help, get this soil established. So, that soil is composed of physical, chemical, and biological properties that we don't have on site. The dredge provides two of those, in particular the chemical properties. This is material that is high in nitrogen, high in phosphorus. That's good for growing plants. The physical characteristics, as Joe mentioned, this is silty, this is clay material, but it still provides some of that fundamental structure that we need on site. In addition to the dredge, we're going to be experimenting with different soil inocula, so introducing bacteria back into the soil, introducing soil fungus. These are things that, again, these are complex relationships, and this is going to take a long time to address this. But this is really the building blocks of what will be, become a really spectacular natural area in the future. So kind of moving up in the ecosystem and looking at herbaceous plant communities. And some people, you might have this kind of false sense that, well, trees take a long time, but let's just put some prairie seeds down and let's just make prairie. And what I want to continue to illustrate here is that prairie ecosystems are also incredibly complex, both above ground and below ground. So the image on your left, what that's really portraying is just how extensive these prairie plants are with their root systems. The image on the far left, you can see, it kind of looks like a line. That's basically showing the root profile and above ground profile of turf grass. And turf grass really, when you see just how shallow those root systems are, they really don't provide much in the way of water quality benefits. A lot of the water just simply runs off, does not have a time to reach the soil, and it's really not good at sustaining those soil microorganisms. So look at all the root systems of some of those prairie plants, things like big blue stem. Those go 10 feet underground, and what those root systems have to contend with on this site, 2 feet of dredge material and maybe some healthy soil, and then they hit fly ash or they hit concrete. So it's simply not a matter of putting some seeds on the ground and letting these grow. We really have to approach this in stages. So the other part of this slide that I have up here, I'll kind of walk through with you, is this concept of ecological tolerance, that every plant species has its own set of ecological tolerances, and these are quantified by botanists through what's called a coefficient of conservatism, and it has nothing to do with political connotations. It's really how conservative, how general that range of ecological tolerances are. So this is on a scale of 0 to 10. So think of something like common ragweed. It can grow up through a crack in the sidewalk. It could grow almost anywhere. That would have a score of like a 0. You get up to the height of the, something like lupin that has a score of 7. It has a narrow range of habitat requirements that it can persist in. So as we look to restore this site, we can't look to some of these species like lupin or some of these other, charismatic prairie species, but we need to stick with things that are going to grow but also have some functionality. So I show black-eyed Susan here. This has a coefficient of conservatism of 1. Probably anybody who's tried to grow this knows it's pretty easy to grow. But it's also attractive and it's also functional, provides pollinator habitat, provides other wildlife habitat. So looking at reintroducing the herbaceous species on site, we're going to be targeting that lower end of the scale, the 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, plants that are in that range. So, black-eyed Susan, bergamot, other wildflowers like that. The other thing that I'll emphasize, getting back to the prairie grasses, is we're not going to be able to start with those right off the bat. We really need to build that soil profile. So what you're going to be seeing in a lot of these restored meadows throughout the park are going to be fescue grass. So most of these are non-native, but we hope that these are ephemeral in nature. So in other words, we're planting these non-native grasses to provide that initial starting point. We're going to be interseeding those with some of these herbaceous wildflowers, and we're going to need to give this time, the soil time to build before we then start looking at converting over to these more, charismatic prairie species. And middle grounds will give you a good perspective. We're about 10 years from where we started with middle grounds, and we're just now starting to see some really improvement in the health of the soil on that site, and we hope to begin to introduce more prairie species as time goes on. The one note here that in this I just wanted to cover it before the question and answer series. you're going to probably want to know how many acres of prairie we're planting here. And based on the current plans, it's about 37 acres is what's targeted for, the future restoration. This is my final slide here, and I'll just talk a little bit about restoring forests. And what the slides here are illustrating are kind of these short-term, mid-term, and long-term targets. And again, this is one of those things where we really do have to take this long view. Right now, our focus is on this short-term target. So in this first 1 to 10 years, what can we expect on site? And the first thing that we're doing is we just simply want those trees to be able to survive to achieve a canopy. So that image on your left, these are these tubes that probably are ubiquitous now across the Metropark system. Some people love them, some people hate them. Those are really an important tool for us to get through that first 7 to 10 years of tree growth. So you'll see them on this site, and you can see on the horizon there that this is new dredge that we just brought on site, about 2,000 cubic yards, that will support one of these reforestation areas. So again, underneath that dredge that we brought on site, there's not much to support tree growth. The trees, their deep root system is really structural in nature, but what that dredge is going to give us is the zone for the fibrous root system of these trees, that kind of top 4 to 5 inches of soil. That's really what the trees need to get all of their nutrients. So again, the dredge is really going to give us a head start for planting these trees. The tree shelters are important not only to protect from rodent and deer damage, but they also help to protect the trees from drying out, and they also help to encourage the upward growth of those trees. And the other thing, this is a common question I get, aren't you guys planting those way too close together? And the answer is yes, but that's intentional. So there's two things in mind with that. When you look at the density that we're planting these trees and ultimately what we hope to sustain healthy forests, a couple things. One, we have to take into account mortality, especially on a site like this. We're going to lose trees. The other thing is by planting them close together like that, you really are mimicking more of a natural succession process. So these trees are all growing at the same time. They're competing for light, and that causes them to grow faster in an upward direction rather than spreading out laterally, which allows us to achieve kind of the second period here of canopy establishment. And once that canopy is established, then you start to begin to really you start to get forest function, more animals in the forest, more microorganisms that are able to persist on the understory, and in general, you just get more functioning ecosystems. So, I would anticipate that that's probably in that 15-year time frame on a site like this, and ultimately, what we want are forests like the picture on the right. These healthy forests that persist, 30, 50, 100 years from now. And although that's a long term to look at, I think this is a good point to reflect and kind of tie in, what both Mark and Joe have touched on is, this is a long-term effort. 30 years ago, the Acme power plant, closed down, and it took us 30 years to get to this point. So realistically, looking 30 years in the future is not unrealistic. And, I would expect that we're going to hopefully be well on our way to, the slide on the right. I think the other thing that this really helps to illustrate, this long-term focus, is just how important this collaborative nature of working with the City of Toledo, the Port Authority, the EPA, and other federal and state governments, as well as private businesses like Dana. It really does take all of us working collaboratively in order to pull things like this off. And with that, this is the end I'm sorry, I did want to tell you the number of acres of reforestation. We're going to be restoring about 15 acres of forest on the Glass City site, and that'll be about 9,000 trees. And with that, I'll be happy to engage with everybody with our question and answer session. So thank you.
Thank you, Tim, and all of our speakers. Really informative, and I think one flowed right into the other really well. That was very nice. We are going to have a question and answer period, and I'm getting kind of long on our time, so I'm just going to ask, does anybody have a question they'd like to start with? If not, I'll kind of get us rolling, all right? So first of all, and I kind of had Mark in mind for this because of your work in brownfields, but really it's for anybody. Most of these legacy issues that we're dealing with today were created when laws and attitudes were different than they are now. Are you optimistic that we're on a better path for the future?
I think so. I mean, I think regulations are getting tighter as we learn more about environmental contaminants. I mean, you know, there's legacy chemicals now that 20 or 30 years ago we didn't know much about, and now the science is out knowing how bad they are. So, you know, for cleanups, the standards are definitely getting more stringent for sure.
Feel the same, gentlemen?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Mark, around the city, we talk mostly about this area, but are there some other restoration projects that stand out to you that you wanted to mention?
As far as green maintenance goes, or I know our stormwater department's going crazy with doing a lot of stormwater enhancement projects. Since we're talking about the Maumee River, you know, we've installed trash trappers along Swan Creek to catch floatable debris during, you know, during rain events and also just normal use, so that's good. We've received a lot of GLRI funding for tree plantings. So, well, thank you. So we've planted some trees over at Edison Park. I know we've assisted you guys with the middle grounds on planting some trees back, I think, 2012, I believe. So yeah, there's lots of grant money out there for greening up brownfields for sure.
Yes.
So the short answer is the plants that we select for growth are, we use the USDA growing season maps, and they've already modeled for future climate change. So like all the tree species that we're using on site, we know that they're adapted for those growing those growing zones that are further south of us. And also most of the material that we're acquiring, the trees, are from nurseries that are either at or lower than our current latitude. So we are taking that future into account. I would like to think that projects like this collectively are going to help address, you know, that future climate change. So we can't say this one by itself, but, you know, having such a visible public park where we can do this kind of restoration and showcase the benefits of it, hopefully that, you know, that word will spread, and you know, we can make a difference with future climate change impacts as well.
I'm going to trade microphones with you. This one is for the live stream for those viewing at home, and this one is for the room. So.
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. So we are continuing to do reforestation. The site where I indicate over here where we put the dredged material, there'll be several hundred trees that will be going in there either this fall or next spring. The issue, you know, as Joe had pointed out, structurally that material can be a little challenging to work with. And what we found is over at least one winter where you have those freeze-thaw cycles, it helps to break up that material and give us a little more structure to work with. So, you know, as I mentioned, between this site and the Phase 2 area, we'll be planting about 9,000 trees, and it's going to be a while before they get to a height where, you know, we're starting to canopy, but we got to start somewhere.
Question over here.
On our dredge material, is there a program that you have where you're contacting the local farmers and enticing them to use the dredge material as opposed to chemical fertilizers? And what is the cost to them in relationship to them who's going to buy the commercial fertilizer?
Sure, that's something that our drift committee has been focused on, and we have local farmers that participate on that committee. You know, farmers can be, you got to really sell them, make your case before they get sold on anything, because they've been farming those acres for years and years, and why would they change what they're doing? So you have to have a compelling reason for them to do that. You know, the price of fertilizer today is different than it was a year ago. It's much more expensive with inflation. The price of fuel is more expensive. So to give you an idea, The material that they hauled down to Wood County from the Center of Innovation right across the river, I think it was $15 to excavate it and load it per cubic yard, and then an additional $8 to spread it on the field. So you're talking, you know, $23 to bring a cubic yard of dredge material down to Wood County. So you have to have projects that are relatively close by, and you have to, you know, be competitive with substitute products and get that same benefit. So those are the kinds of things that we're measuring through our drift committee. Sometimes the economics may not shake out. We may need some help. That could come from the state or a number of different resources. So we're exploring all the avenues, but at least we do have some capacity for storage until we can figure out the economics.
Another question on the dredging. What depth do you dredge the river at?
Well, the maximum depth for the St. Lawrence Seaway is 26 feet 6 inches. That's the depth of the locks of the seaway. So they over dredge a little bit because some of the Lakers draft a little bit more than that. So about 28, 29 feet is typically what you find in the federal channel.
To the dredge material, have you explored blending it with any sludge from the sewage treatment?
We did have a program where we did that fairly successfully. It was used as a cover at a landfill after it was blended together with some spent lime. But we were doing that out at the CDF, and I think some politics got in the way, and people said, well, certainly you're causing these algae blooms because you're bringing sludge out to the CDF, and that wasn't the case at all. But that was the perception people had. So we could do it probably somewhere further inland, but I wouldn't want to blend the materials together anywhere near the river or lake, just for perception reasons. Good question, though.
Over here. Sorry.
Another question on the dredging. Farmers have been working to try to eliminate the runoff. Is that showing up in the amount of dredging that you're having to do each year?
That's a good question. Maybe, but a lot of it, so much depends on the spring rains. Just like the algae blooms, that determines the amount of sediment we get. So if we have a lot of flooding events, a lot of rain like we have now, that's usually not a good sign because you've noticed all the logs and everything floating down the river in the recent weeks. That means there's a lot of sediment also floating down the river. So I think the intensity of storms probably has more to do with it, but certainly it helps. I mean, any way we can keep the soil on those farm fields instead of in the river means less dredging ultimately. That's what our goal would be. Thank you. Good question.
Joe, the artificial islands that you created with the dredging material, have you ever tried growing anything on these islands?
Well, a lot of things grow on them. Phragmites, unfortunately, and you know they grow 12 feet tall, and it's like a jungle of Phragmites out there, and they're an invasive species. So that's maybe not a good thing, but they do help the dredge material to dewater pretty quickly. So there's a lot of uptake through those, and maybe uptake on phosphorus too. So things do grow well in it, as Tim can attest to, and the corn grows well in it too. So we just want good things to grow in it, not bad things.
We have time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, and you guys can just repeat the questions.
Oh, repeat the questions. Okay, I gotcha.
That was going to be my job if you have the microphone. Any other question?
What kind of projections do you use for future flood levels when you're building these models for how you do these projects?
Is that directed to me?
It's either one of you.
So the question is what kind of models we use to project future flooding?
Yeah, is it same? Is it increasing? How are you modeling that out in the next 20, 30 years?
So I will say I would have to defer to an engineer. So we do have inundation mapping that is done with these kind of projects, and especially as it's focused on the shoreline. I will say for this park specifically, we're out of the floodplain. Like it's almost completely filled, so we have no natural floodplain here beyond the stormwater pools that we're storing back here. So, does that cover it?
The back there?
I have a question regarding prairie and forest restoration. What are some things, I know this is kind of between medium and long term, but looking in regards to keeping biodiversity established and kind of avoiding monoculture species that may want to take over areas that are still, kind of letting soil established and all these different things established. Kind of like, is there any sort of plan in terms of trying to keep biodiversity maintained?
Yes, so the question, just a quick summary, is how we're supporting maintaining biodiversity within our forests and our prairie plantings. Did I get a good summary? So different approach a little bit with each of those. Again, as I alluded to, keeping in mind the ecological processes under which these communities evolved over time. This is not something I think we'll ever try on this site, but for example, out at Oak Openings right now, we're going to be trying a controlled grazing experiment with cattle, which, historically bison would have grazed our prairies out there, and what we've noticed over time, to your point, the big prairie grasses kind of encroach and take over, and so we're looking at opportunities without, having to rely strictly on herbicides or mowing to kind of create more openings. So again, those ecological processes are very informative. Maintaining forest biodiversity is a bigger challenge, and it's not just simply because of we do provide a variety of tree species in any mix for new forests, but there is such a host of forest diseases that we have to contend with. So think of the emerald ash borer that's wiped out our ash trees, the chestnut blight and the Dutch elm disease that came before that. There's also a couple of diseases that affect beech trees. There's one that hits sycamores. We're dealing with oak wilt. So the bigger challenge with those forests is to manage these forest pests, and again, to maintain a diversity of tree species in any planting site to account for that future loss that will probably happen with some of those trees over time.
We have time for one or two quick questions.
I just learned recently that we have a filtration system at Metroparks Metroparks of the wastewater gravity flowing off of the high-level bridge. And I was wondering how successful that's been and how meaningful it's been. And if it has been successful, are you going to consider doing that on the east side of the bridge?
So the question was on the stormwater filtration system that we have at Middle Grounds. And that was a great project that we worked on during the construction of Middle Grounds with the Ohio EPA helped to fund that. And I will say, I don't have statistics on the volume of water that is filtered, but that captures all of those downpipes off of the bridge. So you think of all of the fuel or trash that comes off that bridge. I can say from experience, when we have to clean out the top end of those chambers that catch all the heavy material, there's a surprising amount of trash and siltation and just gross stuff that accumulates in those. So I can say with confidence it's working. It would be hard for me to quantify how many millions of gallons it processes over time, but they are absolutely working, and I think it absolutely be a great idea to install those on the other side as well.
And how about last question?
Can you speak a little bit about the Metroparks involvement with the International Park across the lake?
Yeah, so the question is about International Park and the Metroparks involvement with that site. So this is, again, a really exciting part of this overall master plan for the downtown area. So as Ali mentioned at the beginning, the goal is to connect up 300 acres of open space with 5 miles of walkable riverfront. So we're working in partnership with the city of Toledo. Metroparks will be acquiring, city will be transferring the International Park site to Metroparks. The first phase of that planning is already underway. So Glass City Phase 2 will be completed by the end of, largely be completed by the end of this year. And next year we roll right into what's referred to as the Build Grant, which is the first phase of the Glass City Riverwalk. And a major component of that will happen in International Park. So you will be seeing within the next couple of years some pretty amazing, exciting changes at International Park as part of this larger project.
Thank you. That's actually a really good segue to our conclusion. We will have staff here as well as these boards to answer some more questions. So we'll hang around for a little while. That's going to wrap up our panel discussion. So I want to thank our panelists, Mark, Joe, and Tim. Help me thank them for very informative evening. We want to once again thank our Sustaining Our World Series partner, Dana, and thank you, Jeff, for being here and saying a few words earlier. Thank all of you for attending or viewing our live stream at home, the very first presentation in our Sustaining Our World Speaker Series. Our next event will be, do I have a slide on that? Yes, our next event will be on Wednesday, June 22nd, and will feature Dr. Maumee Parker, who was the first African-American to become Regional Director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, overseeing 13 northeastern states. And then she later became, she went on to become head of fisheries nationally for the Park Service. Dr. Parker will discuss the importance of engaging diverse audiences, especially youth, in the environment, and that's something that's very close to our hearts here at Metroparks. The event will once again be held here at the Glass City Pavilion, and you can reserve your tickets now at metroparkstoledo.com. And now I have if weather permits and if weather doesn't permit, and weather doesn't permit. So it's not real conducive to doing a tour tonight. It's really yicky out. But we have a series of hard hat tours of the construction site coming up. And again, metroparkstoledo.com, Dawn back there has that set up on the homepage. And you can make reservations to come out, bring friends. That's everything on the other side of the sledding hill right there is phase 2 that's under construction now. And if you look at some of these drawings, it's kind of starting to look like the pictures. So can't wait to show them to you. I want to thank you again for coming, and we will hang around and answer any questions you may have. Good night.